Welcome back to These Are the Days podcast. We're so excited for our guest today. We have Megan and Mary Flo, who are the founders of The Birds and the Bees, which is a course, book series, and Instagram account helping parents like us talk to our kids about sex and ditching this idea of the talk being a one talk wonder and never talking about it again and normalizing it as a conversation that you're dripping out. Megan talks a lot about this concept of the drip, where you're having a lot of these mini conversations to set them up for more conversations. So you are the guide for them, so they're coming to you with their questions and not other people. It is so good. There's just so many good practical things in this episode. Megan and Mary Flo have a course called The Birds and the Bees. You can find it at birds-bees.com. They also have all these books. Some of them are for the parents and others are for literally like picture books that you can read to your kids. They're all age appropriate. And they have an Instagram account that is so helpful, where they share lots of just like their audience's questions and experiences. I think it's just, if anything, so helpful to follow them and just see like what conversations other parents are having with their kids about this and the experiences that they have, just to get your wheels turning about the kinds of things that you want to talk to about with your kids and how you want to approach these conversations in age appropriate ways, and in ways that don't create shame or guilt or any of that, but just create this open door of conversation with your kids so they are the ones coming to you with their questions. So it's it was so helpful for us talking with Megan today, and I know it's going to be so helpful for you guys. So with that, here's the episode. Okay, Megan, we are so excited to have you on the podcast today, and we're missing Mary Flo, but we're very excited for you to be here and just share with our audience. We have so many questions for you regarding talking to your kids about sex and just normalizing the conversation. We've actually found you guys and your resources through some of our closest friends who recommended it to us, and so we are your target audience, and I think a lot of our listeners are too. So we're just so excited to have you on and share all of your wisdom and just practical things that you guys have for people to like get through communicating this information to your kids in such a like great way. So thank you so much for being here today.
Of course. Thank you guys for having me. This is like such a treat for me, and I'm just so honored. So thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we just wanted to start by giving you the chance to share how you got into this. I know we were kind of talking a little bit before we pressed record, but you know, I think people don't maybe set off to start a career in sex education. So how did you stumble into this, or was it more intentional? And what's your connection with Mary Flo? Give us the story of how Birds and Bees came to be.
So Birds and Bees came to be long ago, actually. Mary Flo Ridley, who is my business partner, not my mom. A lot of people think it's my mom. And she's lovely. She's very sad she can't be here today, but she started this work in the mid to late 80s. So it's actually almost 40 years old.
Whoa.
And so she founded this curriculum way back then. She was assigned she's part of like a women's nonprofit group, and she was given the assignment, like, do some research on sex education and come back and report to kind of our group of moms. And so she sought out to do that and really kind of came up disappointed with what she found, of kind of like, it's either this way or nothing at all. And she felt kind of dissatisfied at the time. She had young kids, and she felt like, well, they're asking questions. She was pregnant with her third, and was just kind of found herself figuring out like, well, can I answer them? Mom, how's that baby getting out of there? Can I tell them? And so really it just was kind of birthed, pun intended, from her own kids' curiosity. And so she set out doing this research with a lot of counselors, pediatricians, children's pastors. I mean, lots of different opinions on people, kind of what's age appropriate, what can we know, not know, and really develop this kind of curriculum that we really still use. The bulk of it, some of it has been changed a little bit, but overall it's the same of what was started back then. And it just grew in popularity. She would speak to people's, MOPS groups or PTA groups or Sunday school classes, and then it just grew and grew. And then she would speak, really, it got to the point in the 2000s where she was speaking all over the country. And so just a speaking thing. And then I was teaching middle school. Like you said, you don't think you're going to get into sex education. That was not necessarily a dream that I had. But if looking back, it was like, well, I was a communications major. I've always loved that. And then I taught middle school, and I felt like I was so meant to be there. And so now that you look back, you can see, well, that all kind of make sense, still a surprise. But anyways, I was teaching middle school and I was kind of alarmed by the sexualized culture of my students at the time. And I got a flyer sent home that said, "Parents, learn how to talk to your kids about sex with Mary Flo Ridley." And I had grown up with her family. They were friends of ours in the neighborhood. One of her girls is my good friends, and I had no clue that she did this. I thought she was just this sweet mom who made really yummy cakes and was friendly, you know? And so I was like, Mrs. Ridley does what? Anyway, so I went to the program that night, just hearing it through the lens of a middle school teacher, and I was just blown away. It was very simple, but very practical, and it made so much sense. And it just spoke in a way that I left thinking, wow, if every parent could speak to their kids about sex in this way, middle school could look so different. And marriages could look so different. We as a culture, particularly a Christian culture, but even bigger than that, we're just not speaking about sex in healthy ways. And so now looking back, I can see that was the beginning of kind of this heartbeat putting on me. Years later, I had kids of my own. I ran into her daughter and she was just talking about my mom kind of wants to step back a bit, but I don't want to take over. And so then it led to this meeting with Mary Flo where I said, I think I might want to. And then lo and behold,
yeah, here you are.
Works in mysterious ways. And then I started training under her. That was 10 years ago. I started training under her. And so I would go to all of her programs and take notes and just practice. And then we split the speaking. And then in COVID, when speaking kind of shut down, we had to pivot and we kind of became an online business. And so now, at the time, I was just like, oh, I don't want to be an Instagram person, talking head, you know, I'm sure you can relate. And then you're kind of like, well, that's where you want to be, or that's where you're supposed to be sometimes, you know? And so then we started taking our message to Instagram, which has really helped grow our community. It's been really cool to reach families all over the world. And then our online course, we're able to share our curriculum in a way higher capacity than she and I can do, like just traveling around. So
yeah.
It's been really cool. I mean, the Lord's really blessed this work and opened a lot of doors. And it's really kind of a wild ride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's great context. I kind of want to speaking of, so that's the context how you got started. Our context, we have a 7, 5, 3, and 1-year-old.
Uh-huh.
And just like Audrey said, how we found you, some friends shared your work with us, but we are beginning to have this conversation with our oldest, Ember, 7. And we very quickly, you said you had a communications major? That's fascinating because we're obviously obsessed with communication, or maybe not obviously, like we talk a lot about communication on this podcast. And it occurred to us as we started to tiptoe into this conversation, like this is a communication issue, yet we don't feel very equipped to have this conversation quite yet with her. And then what's more is the worst form of communication is a one and done statement. To have the talk. It just felt like from what we know about conversation, that just does not seem like the appropriate way to have this fluid, ongoing, relational, directory, a stewardship of your kid through one of the most, important
conversations,
things about life. One of the most natural processes of our designer. It just felt weird. So anyways, we're getting started in this conversation. How shall we get started? Let's, I want to hear your thoughts on we're literally entering. What are your thoughts on getting started and the talk and this whole conversation? I think holistically, and then we'll get into some of the details.
I think that's, you said it in such a great way, because I think when people hear what Birds and Bees is all about, one of our taglines is the talk is outdated. And if you're just listening, we're using air quotes a lot. The talk. That one time conversation around 12 or 13 when mom or dad comes in the room and boom, everything you never wanted to know is said, doors closed, never spoken of again. And to your point, that is the way it is, or the way it's been done. Or some of you might be sitting here thinking, I didn't even get that, And so if that's the norm, but to your point, it makes so much more sense when you step back from a communication point of view and a relational point of view, and you realize if we're kind of to have a big topic that we care about, that we want our kids to understand and steward, I love that word you said, that idea with our kids, it's going to take more than one and done. Think about their faith. We don't just have a big weekend retreat at 13 and say, here's the gospel. Goodbye. It's like, no. We start when they're little and teaching Bible stories, and we build and we sing songs and we talk about their day to day as they're walking the way. And so I think if you think about it from that point of view, it does make a lot of sense. And so we kind of use this example of your kid having a sponge in their brain, and their sponge, you know, you could call it curiosity about sexual things. And they have that. That's not a bad thing. That's actually like a God-given curiosity. And we're all kind of wired that way. Like, why are boys and girls different? Why are they holding hands? Where'd that baby come from? Why are they kissing? You know, all these questions. And as parents, it's our instinct to protect our kids, to want to protect our kids. And so we feel that the best way to protect them is to make sure nothing gets in there. But the reality is that leaves them very vulnerable, because these little sponges go with them everywhere they go. And if they pour water, and if outside water gets poured on an empty sponge, it just soaks it up. And so what we use at Birds and Bees is what we call the drip, drip, drip approach. And it's not all at once, not this huge pitcher of water that is ineffective. It's
half of it spills out.
I love
Yeah.
this. I love the drip, drip, drip. It's so good.
Because that is effective, and it fills their little sponge with your voice and your values. And then if they go off to school or camp or the cousins, the neighbors, and they hear something else, well, what happens when you pour water on a full sponge? It just kind of dribbles off. So ultimately, we believe that these early and often conversations are the best way to protect our kids from outside or confusing messages about sex.
That's so good. And I also love, the drip, 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 I think is just such a good, like, honestly, like, apply that to anything, right? Not just a conversation on sex. Like, it is a parenting philosophy that I think you guys are kind of preaching on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things I've listened to, I know you guys recently started a podcast, or maybe it wasn't recent, or maybe it came back, or I listened to one of the episodes. But it was when you guys are talking about, like, there's so much fear that parents have around this conversation, and there's so much fear about starting the conversation, or how do you approach it, or am I gonna say something wrong? And one of the things that you guys were talking about was, like, a lot of parents will not have the conversation because they are wanting to protect that innocence, and they think that their kid is going to lose their innocence if they know these things. Can you share a little bit about, like, how you guys, because you had such a great answer for that. You totally reframed that into, like, we shouldn't be thinking of that as them losing their innocence. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Because I think it's so important.
Yes, and I think that's such a great place to kind of push back on a little bit. I think everyone's instinct, and it comes from a good place, you know. So I don't fault any parent for being afraid of this or dreading this or being, well, I don't want them to know all these things or whatever. I think we have to kind of step back first and figure out, well, what do we believe about sex? You know, what we kind of have to have our proactive approach a bit of, what do I want my kids to know about sex? You know, do I want them to think it's a good thing in the right boundaries? Do I want them to be afraid of it? What do I want? If I want this to be have a healthy vision of this, then I need to talk about it in a way that it doesn't seem like it's awful or dirty or gross. You know, we need to have, like, reverence around that. I think that's a word that's not really used often when talking about sex. So I think we kind of have to, as adults, reframe what information or which direction am I heading for these conversations? And then a phrase we love to use, to your point, Audrey, is ignorance is not the same as innocence. And I think so often we confuse the two with this topic of, if they just don't know anything, then that keeps them pure, you know? But the reality is almost everything we're talking about was designed by God, right? We didn't create this stuff. And it's the world's view that we're trying to protect them from. But if we're not offering the alternative, what are we offering? You know? And so I think it's a charge to parents to say, this is a good thing. This is the good thing. This is where the boundaries it was intended to be. And this is what we want you to understand. You're going to hear a lot of other things, and that might be confusing, but this is what we're teaching you. This is what we want you to know. And so to move towards your kids with that information. And that's, like, I think the charge to parents to start talking is they get to hear your voice. You know, you get to have the power of the first impression. They get to hear your information and the way you're framing things, and not you're being quiet and hush hush and these topics are taboo and they hear about it over here. That's, I believe, more dangerous than speaking about it in your own home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's this concept we've been pursuing, and the word that we've been using is, like, earn the right to be chosen as the guide. Mm-hmm. And because our kids, I think they're gonna choose their guides, but if you're not, I love that language you used, if you're not drip feeding them interest, mm-hmm. they're going to lose interest, and they're going to go to whoever and whatever is going to guide them. Mm-hmm. But, like, as parents, there'd be no greater honor than to be actively chosen by your kid, mm-hmm. as, like, I want dad to guide me.
Yeah.
And the analogy that it was put to me was like with your boys, you always want to be, and it might be a crude example, you always want to be dangling the next exciting thing so that they keep like earning this like unfolding or flowering interest or like your guy. So like pocket knives, for example. Okay, your boy turns 6, 7, and next thing you know, they might, use your pocket knife more, and they're going to look at it and look at dad and be like, oh wow, like what is that? And the next thing you know, it's fishing, and the next thing you know, it's whatever else, what I mean? Whatever the thing might is. But it sounds like with this conversation, with the mental game, it's like earn the right to be the guide. And I feel like this drip feed method is a phenomenal way to do that. Yeah. And I just want to share that. It's not really a question, but
well, it made me think of this idea too that we have is with your kids are curious, right? When kids are little, to kind of push back against this idea of the talk, when kids are little, they're curious. They're asking questions, and who are they asking? They're asking mom and dad, and then who are they believing? Mom and dad. Like when they're little, like you hear them say to their friends, "Nuh-uh, that's not what my mom said, and my mom doesn't lie." Like they're rooting for us. And so it's like, why not take advantage of those questions when they're little? Well, how come my little brother has that penis and I don't have a penis? Where's my penis? And like speaking into those anatomically correct words, explaining body parts, talking about body boundaries, explaining the story of birth, talking about things in age appropriate ways where ultimately you're taking away this shame of the topic. Because what we want you to be as the parents, to your point, is we want you to be the safe place for your kids to go to for their curious questions. And your reaction to these questions from a very early age can kind of set that tone. If they ask a question, where'd you hear that word? Or shh, don't say that in front of your little brother. You're kind of even verbally or non-verbally teaching them a little bit of like, we don't talk about that here.
Yeah, right.
This is not appropriate for, so to kind of take away that shame, like this is something we talk about in our home.
Do you think that shame is kind of taught in that, like?
I do.
You guys know that we are obsessed with the laundry detergent that we switched to this year. We switched to Truly Free, which is a non-toxic cleaning brand. They make way more than just laundry detergent, but the laundry detergent is what we fell in love with first. We love their signature scent, but they have an unscented version as well. I've been using non-toxic laundry detergent for the past 8 years, and when I finally switched to this, our clothes actually started smelling good. Jeremy was like, what are we using on our clothes, and can we keep doing it? He thought it was like the toxic stuff that makes your clothes smell good. It is so affordable, like comparable to the same price as Tide or like, chemical equivalents, makes your clothes smell good, cleans them without any of the chemicals or synthetic fragrances or bad ingredients. So we've loved Truly Free. We've been starting to slowly try some of their other non-toxic cleaning products. We love their dishwasher soap, their everyday household cleaner. They have a odor and stain cleaner, glass cleaner, bathroom cleaner. Anyways, right now they're doing a deal on their whole home bundle. So if you're looking to just switch a lot of the cleaning products that you have in your home over to non-toxic alternatives that you can trust and just get kind of like the whole home bundle all in one, it's $99 and you get 100 loads of free laundry detergent, 50 loads of free dishwasher soap, 2 packs of everyday cleaner for free, 2 dish soap refills for free, and the refillable jugs for your laundry detergent, along with their Oxy Boost, glass cleaner, bathroom cleaner. That's all included in the price. So you're saving $149 and getting cleaning products safe for your entire family. Highly recommend if you have little kids in your home, crawling babies that you're washing their clothes a lot. This stuff is so good. It works wonders. And again, it is so affordable, which I feel like is rare when it comes to non-toxic products and brands on the market these days. So if you guys have not tried Truly Free yet, I will put the link for this bundle in our show notes so you guys can try it out. Take advantage of it. It runs until the end of this month. Highly, highly recommend. We've been loving Truly Free. I know you guys are going to love it too.
Now, again, I don't want anyone to think, oh shoot, I said that. I can't go backwards. We have a big theme at Birds and Bees of circling back. We want you to be a purposeful parent, not a perfect parent. We're going to all mess up. And so if that reaction maybe sounded familiar to you, circle back. Oh, sweetheart, earlier in the car today, you asked me a really good question and I just didn't give you my best answer. So I'm going to answer it again. These kids are with us all the time. right? They're in our homes or in our cars. So it's like circle back. How was the baby born? Did the doctor, or don't worry about that till you're older, or however you answered it. Circle back. Sweetheart, now that you're turning 8 years old, I want to tell you a little bit more about the day you were born because it is just one of my favorite memories. It is so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to go there. I want to go there because we're just scratching the surface on some of these conversations, hence diving into all of your resources. By the way, we've got the books, I have this as my reading in the sauna currently when I do my 30-minute sauna. So I can just like skim little bits, drip information into my own brain.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we have really like dove extensively into it with our kids is just the conversation on birth, because our fourth baby, our most recent baby, we had at home. And my daughter actually was there for the birth. And we were kind of on the fence if our 5-year-old and 3-year-old were going to be there or not. But it was the middle of the night and it happened really fast. So they actually came into the room like after she was born. But I had so many conversations with her about birth before that, like 6 months leading up, like the whole time. Because I asked her, I'm like, do you want to be there? Like I kind of gave her, and we watched birth videos. Like she was very aware. I'm like, it can go lots of different ways, you know? So she was pretty like, some might say like, oh, is that losing some of her innocence? Or is that too much for a 7-year-old, right? Like some people may make that claim. But for me, it was really important. I really wanted to, kind of in the same way that you're doing with sex, I really wanted to reframe, and sex is a part of this, but I really want to reframe for her this concept of birth and normalizing birth. For me, that's something that I'm super passionate about, where it's like, it's not this like painful experience to be dreaded. It's not this thing that like you need all of these other people in order to get through like it, and just like all of these kind of westernized, fear. Something to be afraid of. Like it is this natural, beautiful thing that can be one of the most spiritual, incredible moments of your entire life. And we shouldn't be like dreading it as this painful thing to be afraid of. And so I really want to like reframe that for her in the same way that we're trying to reframe these other things. And so I'm just curious, like your thoughts on that and how like the conversation surrounding birth fits into what you guys are talking about, because I feel like that is such a good starting point for the younger years with kids. Is like, of course they're going to say, you know, especially if they're having baby siblings, like, well, where does baby come from? How do they come out? You know, all of that. So just how do you guys speak to birth as, you know, kind of a segue or a starting point for that conversation?
Well, you nailed it. I think so often that's like the first topic that kind of comes up with kids. Like when people hear, oh, what do you do? Birds and beads. Like, oh, well, we teach parents how to talk to their young kids about sex. Well, what that really means is sex is this big umbrella, right? We're not sitting down with like a 4-year-old discussing intercourse. That's a lot. Not totally crazy, but what it is like, again, to the drip, drip, drip method of like, we can talk later on about body parts and safety and, abuse prevention, all these other things that are really important. But we have all these steps in our curriculum, and step 3 is the story of birth, because typically the first question a child asks mom or dad that makes you realize, oh, wow, they're like thinking in there, it's like, how is that baby getting out? Because kids are just problem solvers, right? So that 5-year-old is looking at that mom or teacher or cousin or aunt or something thinking, how is that going to work? And so we typically encourage parents to follow the developmental curiosity of the young child. They're not really going to say how to get in there. They're going to figure out, how does it get out? And so it's like, we're going to go with that. And we tell parents, obviously your daughter, had a full lesson about it all because she was there, which is such a cool experience. And for parents that aren't doing home births or having their kids around, you can share these stories in really cool ways and use words, like birth canal, uterus, or maybe cesarean section. The baby comes out of the vagina. It's connected by the umbilical cord. You can say all these words and paint this really amazing picture, because we want our kids to kind of be dazzled by the story of birth. Like, isn't it beautiful how our bodies were designed to do this? Isn't that so cool? Or sometimes a baby doesn't, go down the birth canal, so the doctor uses instruments and makes a slit and lifts the baby out. That's a cesarean section. I mean, birth is amazing, really, regardless of how it happens. It's amazing that babies are born. So, I mean, we want our kids to see these things, to hear these things, to know that we, that it's an amazing process, and our bodies were designed to do that. And so I think by introducing these words to these kids, we're helping them see birth is really cool. But the other thing we're helping them see through the story of birth is we are elevating ourselves as mom or dad. We are elevating ourselves to expert status. You have a question about babies, I have answers. Because in that long answer, you probably heard words you've never heard before. Umbilical cord, a cesarean section, a birth canal. Excuse me, what is that? But I know. I know what these things mean. Okay, so if you have questions, you come to me, because you want to establish yourself as this position of authority, and not like in a mean way, but just in a safe way. Of, I'm so glad you asked me that question. That's such a good question. That's a phrase we repeat all the time in our courses. That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked, because we want our kids to know what, no matter what they say, maybe it's like this crass word they heard somewhere and you're dying inside, but that's a really good question. I'm so glad you asked me that, because we want our kids to know this is who they should come to, right? They have come to the right place. And that happens, again, little by little, not all at once, but these little conversations that we're building, right? This building blocks of, these are body parts, this is how birth works. Seeds and eggs, we talk all about reproduction in all living things before we even talk about reproduction in humans. So I mean, there's all these conversations that we're having, but our primary audience is parents with kids ages 1 through 10. So there are so many conversations to be had in that first decade of life before you even think you're supposed to be having these conversations. But what we're doing is creating this solid foundation, not only of information, but a solid foundation of connection, a solid foundation of trust and communication with parent to child.
Yeah. Wow. That's really good. So how do you start to bridge or elevate the conversation from birth, and then they should have already be familiar with their body parts, vagina, penis, and some other bigger words and stuff. What does that conversation, like for a 7-year-old, for example, migrate into, well, how did the baby get there? Mm-hmm. What is that transition what would you share about migrate, elevating the conversation into that question?
Well, and I maybe just want to say this just because I think, like, my daughter literally was at my birth, watched her come out. We had so many conversations. She still has not asked me, how did the baby get there?
Yeah,
for
she
sure.
hasn't. But we want to prepare for it.
I want to be prepared for it. But what I'm saying is, like, you can't share enough about that. You know what I mean? Like, they don't think about things it takes them a while to get there, to piece all that together, like you're saying. Totally. And so, like,
well, she might be processing in her head too.
Totally. But she's like, Mom, what if you have 50 babies? I'm like, well, Mom and Dad have to decide if we're going to have another baby. She's like, but what if God just gives you? Like, yeah. Anyways.
Okay. So part of something we talk about a lot in our curriculum is this topic of seeds and eggs. And these are little conversations you can have in the kitchen. And really what you're trying to do is kind of cultivate this fascination with the way things grow. And this is in all living things, right? So, let's say you're cutting an apple for a little snack, and have them come over and look just for a 4-second conversation of, look, deep inside this apple are teeny tiny apple seeds. Did you know that these apple seeds make new apples? You're kind of helping them see this connection that these little apple seeds, something so teeny tiny, creates new life. It reproduces itself. Do apple seeds make oranges? No.
Oh, it's so good. That's like a truth framework.
Yeah.
It's
anyone
true.
who's planting the garden right now, perfect example. Yeah.
But it's a great, that's a great example. And, seeds and your flowers in the flower pots, or just kind of help marvel at the way things were designed, right, to reproduce. And the message we're really sending our kids is this, that deep inside every living thing is part of what it takes to make the next living thing just like it, and seeing how things reproduce. And so for many years, to your point, like, they're not going to say, what does sex mean? That may not be the answer, the question a 7-year-old asks, but, and using animals as an example is really helpful too. It takes, a male dog and a female dog to make dog puppies. Or, if you want to have a biblical understanding of sex, look at the stories. Why do you think on Noah's Ark, they took 2 animals? That's interesting. Or, seeds make new life. Eggs make new life too. Look at these little chicken eggs. Isn't it amazing that these little eggs create new life. Wow, that's amazing. Lots of little conversations. And so I think also having the language of seeds and eggs is really helpful as you get closer to the conversation of human reproduction, right? Because a conversation with a 7, 8-year-old, if they want to know how that baby got in there, might sound way different than one with a 12-year-old, you know? And so I think back to this idea of little by little, drip, 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 you're kind of slowly putting together all these ideas under the understanding of what is your family's belief on sex? Where are you heading with these conversations?
So good. Okay, I want to ask you too now, just like kind of, this is maybe a season of life ahead of us, but maybe you're more in the thick of this. Just the conversation around puberty being a part of this, obviously, and how, because I've seen the way that you share on Instagram is like so helpful because you share a lot of other people's responses. Not that you're necessarily like agreeing with how someone does, but you share kind of all sides of the spectrum and a myriad of different ways that you can tackle these topics, which I think is really helpful for parents to just read and kind of get their wheels turning on like, oh, what am I going to do about sleepovers? What am I going to do about when my daughter says she has a crush? What am I going to, like, you just have so many different things in your little highlight bubbles that I think are so helpful. But speaking to like puberty, what do you see the most with parents that you've talked to as like being something that's missed? Like, what are parents missing when it comes to teaching their kids about puberty? That like it's just a question that's coming up a lot maybe, or something that they wish they would have addressed or done. Maybe it's a super practical thing with their kid earlier to kind of prepare them for puberty. And maybe speak a little bit to the girls and the guys because I know it might be different.
Yeah. So I think puberty is, I was about to say, I think puberty is fun to talk about, but that just puts me in a crazy category.
Yeah.
I won't say that. But it's actually really interesting because I think part of what I do like about these topics is to make people comfortable with the uncomfortable. Because I think that is the challenge that we have that we feel so passionate about. Because, I mean, look around. Everybody went through puberty. You know, look around. All your friends are going to go through it. And so I think, but everyone went through it in such a painful way because when you're at that age, you think you're the only person who's having this happen to you. You're the only person who feels this way. You're the only person who looks this way. You're the only person. And so I think as parents, if we could kind of move ahead of our kids and kind of pave the way a little bit for them and introduce this idea, then I think taking the tabooness away can kind of help such an uncomfortable season for them feel a bit more comfortable. Now, I'm not going to act like puberty is going to be a dream, but just to kind of pave the way. And so I think part of that can start at a very young age, and not crazy young, but you know, and it depends on the age of your family. Your firstborn's probably not going to figure things out until later, where the third or fourth, these conversations are going to happen sooner. So depending on where they go to school, what kind of neighborhood you're in, you know, who you're around, all these things vary. So we really are careful not to put specific ages on things, but loosely speaking, let's say around third grade, let's say, you know, have you ever wondered what the word puberty means? You know, well, puberty is just another word for growing up. You're probably going to hear about it a little bit more. It's kind of about how your body goes through changes to become a man, your body goes through changes to become a woman, you know, kind of so your brain changes a little bit, all these different things, but we're going to kind of talk about it a little bit more over the years. So right there, you're kind of just going ahead of them so they hear the word puberty later, you know, from kids laughing at school, or maybe there's like a note going home that we're going to be talking about puberty in fourth grade or whatever it is. It's not like this feeling of, I think I know what this word is because the kids were saying it.
Yeah.
But my mom's never said anything to me and I definitely don't want to talk to her about it. You know, you kind of want to go ahead of it. So I think in these conversations, the goal would be to kind of try to create comfort around it. You know, you don't want things to be secret. So mentioning the word puberty, talking about body changes, I think it's helpful as a mom and dad too, to kind of be a little aware of what's to come, you know? And so I was actually just talking to a mom of girls and she was asking about sports bras and shaving legs. And those are like hot topics, you know? And now the sports bras, and again, this is maybe like a subcultural thing, or like a very popular look, you know? And she's like, well, what do I do? My daughter's I can't remember if she was in second grade or third grade, and she wanted some sports bras or whatever. And she's like, it just feels so young, you know? Anyway, so we were just like talking through that a little bit, like, well, what are we putting on this, or all these little things. And anyways, she decided at the end of the day, she's like, you know, I think I'm just gonna get a couple of them, put them in her drawer, and if she wants to wear them, great. If she thinks they're uncomfortable, great. And I said, I think at the end of the day, that's probably a great way to approach this, because you're not putting stigma around it of like this, well, now that you've developed, it's time to go shopping for a bra, or like you kind of pass the point of comfort here. Let's step backwards, where it's like, hey, this is something you probably don't need anytime soon, but if you're comfortable with it, go for it. And same thing with shaving. We had a really fascinating conversation on Instagram about shaving. And to me, the biggest response from people, I mean, we had thousands of people comment from all over the world. It was really interesting, but saying the biggest emotion that people were sending in from their childhood was the embarrassment they felt. Like, I wanted to shave my legs, but I was so embarrassed to ask my mom that I didn't. And I tried to hide it, or she kind of brushed me off of like, you're too young, we're not doing that, or something like that. It was like, there was such, I mean, the messages almost made me cry because they were all so deeply hurt by that. So it's like, okay, well, to stepping a bit back with like all puberty things, like it's uncomfortable. Things are uncomfortable. So how can we kind of go ahead of that with our kids? Like, hey, some girls are going to probably start shaving in the next couple of years. I don't think you really need to yet, but if you ever want to, or you have questions about it, just know you can come and talk to me and we can make this decision together.
Yeah.
Just kind of by going ahead of it. I'm not saying
front running it is.
What'd you say?
Front running it
being
sounds,
that like one step ahead and finding that line of
that's the bullseye. It's just being ahead of it.
It's just so hard to find that. But I saw some of those stories. I like deeply resonate with that, and I think there's a reason why there's so much. Why you're probably getting flooded with that, because I remember, I'll just share a quick story here to be vulnerable. And this is not a knock on my parents at all, but like, I was raised in a Christian home, like very much like the 90s church kid, right? Just and you can assimilate a lot of the stereotypes with that. But so my mom just like, I was a late puberty, super late, and I was very involved in sports, so that was like a part of it. And I think because I was late to like having a period, like I was late to that. But like I definitely had hair on my legs, and I was a redhead and have always been a redhead. And so I remember, yes, but there's a point to my story. Because middle school boys like to make names for redheads, right? And some of those names maybe are not so good. And so, and some of them have to do with your hair on other parts of your body that could be red, right? And so I remember like, that was like one of the things I got teased for like the most in middle school. And part of it was because I had hair on my legs. Now my hair on my legs wasn't red, but they would still call me a fire crotch, Right. And I remember when I was in 7th grade, I would wear these high toe socks to school, like every day, to cover the hair on my legs because I was like so embarrassed. But I was mortified to ask my mom about it because I was like, I'm not going to go talk to my mom about this, because that was not a normal conversation in my home. That's not a knock on my mom at all. It's just that like, I don't think that parents in that generation in general were normalizing these conversations, and they didn't have resources like the things that you're providing to people. You know what I mean? They had to look a lot harder to find things beyond like whatever the church was teaching them as the status quo way to teach your kids about this, right? Like that was kind of their main resource. And so they didn't have this plethora of information that they were like being able to dissect. But yeah, it's so, I think just like I'm so sensitive to like with our own kids, I just don't want them to feel shame. I don't want them to feel like they can't talk to us about anything, scared to talk to us about things. I feel like if there's any goal in any of this, it's just that like, I want them to feel like they can come to us. I want them to feel like they can ask us questions and to be one step ahead of that in the sense that like we are the people that are going to be the guide, right? They're not going to go to so-and-so talking about it on the playground because they heard it there first. They're going to come to us because we are that one step ahead. But I am curious because Jared and I have had a couple like maybe borderline arguments about this, because we have some friends who I think take that a little bit too far, where they really go for it. Like explaining to their young kids what a blowjob is. Okay. Like, I'm like, do we need to do that? Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, can you go too far? And like, do parents go too far? Do you see a lot of messages about like, oh, I wish, I went there with my kid on this and I wish I hadn't? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think so. We believe a lot in age appropriate answers. So obviously we want to be truthful, but we also think sometimes, let me back up. So we want our kids to understand what sex is based on your family's beliefs, right? So let's say we call it your family message. So let's say you want your family message to be sex is a gift from God intended for marriage. So that's kind of the overarching theme that you have for all of your conversations. So you want to make sure you've had enough conversations to establish that before you start talking about all the other things. Does that make sense? So like if if you don't feel like my older two, I guess, particularly my oldest, where we've had so many conversations. So now I feel like we have got a pretty steady foundation. So when slang terms come in, I can kind of say, this is actually a really crass word, or this has to do with sex, but it's not really appropriate to be talking about. Remember, this is a gift from God that we should have respect towards it, whatever. And so I'm able to explain certain things because I can point back to our foundation. So if you have a really young child and you don't really have that foundation established, I wouldn't use slang terms or sex acts as your springboard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to get ahead of it because they're going to hear it. Yeah.
Right. And I think, and again, what you don't want to do is say, don't say that word. Like,
right.
Whatever.
Right.
You could say, well, that's not really an appropriate word for us to use. It's talking about, body parts, or it's talking about whatever, how you can kind of nullify it a little bit. But I don't think, and again, I don't know what ages we're talking about here and there, but I think a good answer is it depends on how much they already know.
Yeah. It depends on what? What'd you say?
How much they already know.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. They have the example, I think we're talking about full context. They have all the framework, all the foundation, Jesus centered home, and they, I think they're 12 and 10 or something like that. So they're up there in the age range, and they're, very, the word I want to say is proficient, but just, a great example.
We don't need to get too.
Yeah, we don't need to get too into it. But my point is, it's there's got to be some sort of like window, we feel like, and we're trying to figure out where are we going to strike, and how much forerun do we want to be,
And I think a 12 and 10-year-old, when you're kind of in those teen, middle school years, like I think, and you have a solid foundation, I think basic definitions are okay. That's actually a type of oral sex. What does that mean? Well, oral means mouth, sex means penis.
Yeah.
What you do the math.
Got it.
So I think there's a way to break things down. A hard line that we like to draw is private and personal, or that kind of line. Sometimes as kids get older and they're connecting dots, you're like, well, do y'all do that? How do y'all do that? Where do y'all do that? Have you done this before? And you're like, I think it's okay for parents, in the vein of we're being open and honest, to also draw that line of we're not answering those questions. Like, we will talk to you about facts and information, but it's also a very personal thing that I don't share with my friends. So I'm not going to be talking to you about that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think that's a healthy line to draw as well.
Mm-hmm.
This is a fascinating, great segue into what I want to kind of maybe chat about next. And that is it does feel like a razor's edge of where shame can be built and information can be delivered. And specifically with boys, they start waking up with erections, and then wondering, why is it hard? And, why do my testicles look different than theirs? And there's these like shower conversations, and they have no context for what's right or wrong. So they're sticking their butts in the air and they're doing all this stuff. And I'm constantly like, okay, we don't do that.
Right.
we can have this conversation, but like, you don't touch that. That's his, not yours.
Mm-hmm.
What is this conversation? How should we be approaching this conversation specifically for boys? And I don't know, the line between don't, which could lead to shame, and, yes, because it's okay to talk about it.
Right. And that's where I think it is the drip, drip, drip. We share a lot of information with little kids. Well, little kids need kind of black and white boundaries, right? So when you're talking to a 4-year-old and your goal is to educate and to protect, you need some pretty clear boundaries, right? This is your penis. Nobody can touch this. You don't touch somebody else's penis. These are the lines that we draw. Well, you're not going to be having that kind of conversation with a 14-year-old, right? Those are different conversations. Now, obviously, in certain contexts, yes, but you're going to add things to it. So pre-puberty, all these conversations are not involving the dangers or pleasures associated with sex. When we're having all these conversations with our little kids, everything is the basic biology with your family's core beliefs. Not because we're trying to avoid something that's difficult, it's because they're not wired that way yet. Even if you told them the actual act of sex in the most basic way, their response isn't going to take that in a sensual way. They're not going to take that in as like, yep, I can see where that's really cool.
Totally.
Yeah, yeah.
No, they're going to hear that and be like, gross. And I think as parents, we have to say, you know what? I can see that because you're not an adult. This is not for kids. And that might be our first conversation with our prepubescent child about sex, but it's not our last. And so these conversations, again, will continue to build and evolve. And with, boys, it's like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. But you also want to enter in these conversations as they get older with empathy, or and same with girls. You're like, I understand why you feel this way. We're designed to feel this way. That's not a bad thing. But let's all talk about self-control. Let's talk about the boundaries and why certain boundaries are in place to protect us. What does that mean? What are some habits we could start to instill? So, I think, but leading with that, the way you're feeling is the way you're supposed to feel. This is a good thing, but we can't just let things run wild, right? And so I think those conversations, again, it kind of goes back to this drip, drip, drip approach. It's not gonna be a one-time conversation where it's like, well, this is what it is, put it away, don't touch it. They're going to kind of evolve with time. And then I think leading with empathy in a lot of these conversations is really helpful too.
Mm-hmm. And I think the way that you guys share your information is very I like the matter of factness of it with little kids, where it's like, you just tell them the facts, yes, blood is flowing to the end of your penis. And then you kind of distract them with something else that you say, you have these little things where it's like, I think that's such a good, little practical nugget for parents where it's tell them the facts and then change the subject to something else to where it feels just like a part of life, right? It's not this big thing where there's stigma around it or anything. It's just and moving on to the next thing, right? Here you go. And that's all you really need for right now, And I think that's
your stomach is growling because you're hungry.
Right.
And that's something we talk about a lot because it's not in a sense to, that's enough of that, or don't talk about that anymore. It's more of I think we have the freedom as a parent to pivot quickly like that because we know they might talk about that again. Or the 3-year-old that's watching TV and touching his penis and is wondering why it got bigger. You can say, hey, if you leave it alone, it'll go back to the way it was. Did you want to go outside and play or watch a different show? I think we can pivot like that because we're trying to normalize it in a way, where we say, don't touch that. Stop touching your penis. Oh my gosh, what are you doing? Gross. That's a lot more confusing and shame-filled than, oh, this is what's happening. The blood's rushing to the end of your penis. If you leave it alone, it'll go back to the way it was and move along.
That's really, I love that too, because it implies for the parent an idea of patience. And I feel like specifically with talking about God and spirituality, parents often just chomp at the bit at any opportunity they get. And then they overshare. And the child kind of loses their maybe I shouldn't have
too much.
I shouldn't have brought that up.
Waterboarded.
I got waterboarded. Yeah. And so maybe I'm not going to ask a question about God next time because dad's really eager to throw it on me. So I love that. That's a super helpful tip. It's just know that you're gonna get 100 opportunities if you don't try to do it all in 2 or 3.
Right.
Which is such a theme of your work. Is the drip feed is really and it should be applied to the conversation about reality, conversations about, human anatomy and sex and all this stuff. I love it.
Okay, I know we're getting closer on time, but one thing that I really want to ask you, and this maybe can be the last thing. I know there's probably so much you could say about this, but I feel like there's a lot. One of the reasons why parents want to be ahead on this stuff is not just to teach our kids so biologically they know that it's God's design and it's beautiful and it's not all bad, but is to protect them from abuse and potential I guess abuse is really the reality. So
or ignorance,
and I think can you just speak to that a little bit, and also maybe the sleepover conversation and what you see from parents a lot regarding that, and because I think that's such a hot topic that comes with that, and we know that abuse often happens in that environment. But can it ever be a healthy environment, or what conversations can you have with your kids if you want them to be able to do that, go to a sleepover, whatever? How can you prep them for that? And just the abuse bucket. Can you go there for a little bit with us?
Yes. And I will say that's like a passion point for us because, um, if you speak to any expert in that field, they will tell you the number one thing that we can do as parents is to teach them the anatomically correct words for their body parts and clearly label them as private. And so I think what's happened is so often body parts, penis, vagina, good touch versus bad touch, it's not spoken of at all, right? And so we kind of have what we kind of call this two camps, right? We have the families that just use the words like privates, we kind of just whisper those words, and it's kind of like shh, shh, you're bathing them in the bathtub, and then it's like, oh, yep, keep that clean, keep it private, get out. We kind of just don't talk about those parts, which kind of creates maybe unintentionally some shame or some secrecy there. And then you have the other side, which uses what we like to call the wingy wangy words, which I'm sure we've all heard lots of fun words for those parts. And that kind of enhances the silliness. If you have little kids, little kids are silly about their body parts, and that's age appropriate, so don't panic. But as the adults, we don't need to enhance that silliness, And so we kind of want to meet parents, or we want to meet our kids right in the middle and be medical and matter of fact when it comes to their body parts. So what happens is in these most cases of abuse is there is no one's, again, got back to that idea of going ahead of them. No one's using these words. No one's having these conversations with them about, hey, nobody should touch your penis. Or guys, quit wrestling on the bed. If you're going to wrestle, put your underwear on. We don't touch somebody else's penis. Okay, girls, the neighbors in the backyard, y'all, we're not supposed to be playing doctor. We're going to keep the doors open while we play. All these little conversations, because kids are curious, stuff happens, right? And so if nothing is spoken of, and these are kind of hush hush secrets, and then God forbid a line is crossed with an older relative or a neighbor or something awful, there's no path for a child to follow. There's no life raft out there for them. Who do I go to with this information? Oftentimes they know innately something felt off, but they don't know what to do with this information, nor do they have the language to share it. And so again, we want to preempt to protect. We want to preempt to prepare. And so we kind of start talking about it. That's your penis. You don't have a penis, you have a vagina. And some people want to use the word vulva. If that's a word you like to use, go for it. But what we want you to know is nobody else can touch this, right? This is a private part. So we're gonna put our underwear on, or that's why we wear a bathing suit, or all these things. Or if, cousins are over and playing, we kind of just loop it in with all the other rules that we have, or the neighbors or whatever. It's like, okay, guys, we're going to go upstairs, and the kids can go upstairs and play while the grown-ups are eating dinner downstairs. Keep the lights on. Be kind to the little kids. This is the movie we're watching. We're not going to, change the movie. Keep your clothes on. Remember, our private parts are private. We don't touch anybody else's private parts. If y'all need anything, come downstairs. It's like, we are talking about this because it's not a secret.
I love that.
And I think just like the other week, my youngest came home from school saying, so-and-so hit my penis at the playground. And we were talking about it, and I didn't have any like red flags go off or anything like that. It was just a little boys being stupid. But I was really encouraging him. I'm so proud of you for telling me that. Like, you are so smart. You knew that wasn't okay, and you did the right thing by coming and telling me. Because what we're trying to teach our kids, or what we're trying to do really, is help them build this muscle. It takes practice of like, hey, you felt that feeling inside that didn't feel right, and you came and told me. And that is why I'm so proud of you. Man, you did such the right thing. I'm so proud of you. Now if I felt that was a serious situation, I would have talked to the teacher, talked to the kid's mom, or whatever. But instead, I just really praised him and affirmed his reaction and said, and if he does that again tomorrow, say, hey, quit throwing that ball at my penis. Because what we're trying to do is take away the secrecy. I think so often, whether it's sexual abuse or pornography or any of these dark topics, we always say, like, the devil loves the darkness.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think
That's
so
where
much
he
of it is
hides.
that it's just the lights are out and people are running amok.
Yep.
And so our words, our communication cannot take away these problems, but they're essentially just turning the lights on.
Yes.
So good.
So it's just that we're not acting like this is going to save everybody from all the things, but it's like it just helps prevent things so much. Where these conversations, these boundaries, these talking points, all this everything, you're essentially just building these muscles for these kids to know, hey, we don't do that. We talk about this. My mom's always saying that to me, or we always talk about this. And so essentially, you're kind of throwing a life raft to these kids. So if something does not sit well, if something doesn't feel right to them, they know, my mom's always telling me that we don't keep secrets from each other, or our family doesn't do secrets. So why that guy told me not to tell my parents? Or she's always talking about nobody else can touch my private parts. Why did that just happen? So we want to go ahead of them. And so we really encourage parents. Not only are we trying to have these drip, drip, drip conversations and incorporate these words in age appropriate ways, but ultimately really want to protect our kids, And so and if communication is one of the best things we can do to protect them, then we want to give you talking tools in how to start that. Because the beauty of starting when they're really young is A, for their protection and safety, but B, it's for us as parents. We get to feel confident by the time, if you start talking like this and they're really little, by the time you get to 10, 11, 12, it's like, oh yeah, we've been doing this for a decade, and they know, oh, there she goes again. This is something she talks about, or, I just think, oh yeah, this is the way it is in our house. And so I think ultimately it's not, like, oh, a guarantee that nothing bad's going to happen, or a guarantee that they're not going to sleep around, or whatever the goal is for you. But what we are trying to do is equip you to have these healthy conversations, so that you can be a safe place for them, and that they can have a understanding of what sex is intended to be, and be able to see what it's not intended to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. So
Very
many good things. Thank you so much, Megan.
I mean, that's it. That's great. That's the Lord's work.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Well, we love it. Mary Flo and I both feel very passionate and called to this work. But at the end of the day, it's everyone, right? It's all of y'all listening, all the parents. You have to do it, right? You have to put in the work, and we want to empower you and equip you, but it's up to the parents. So often people will say, well, could you just come talk to my kids? And it's like, no, because that's not effective.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can do this.
They got to trust mom.
Yeah. And it's like,
dad.
you can do it. And your kids need to hear you. And I think that's kind of our charge to parents at the end of the day, is the world is shouting very clear messages about sex that will probably not line up with exactly the information you want your kids to have. Right. And so if out of fear or discomfort or awkwardness, we're not saying anything, we are essentially just like waving a white flag and kind of saying, this is really hard for me and I'm not feeling comfortable. So just like ask your friends. Just
100%.
And you always say, I've heard your guys' little tagline, like, it's not about you and your past, it's about them and their future. And like, I think that's such a good thing for us going in. It's like,
really good.
We can't go into these conversations thinking, oh, I can't talk about that because this happened to me, or I wasn't good about this, or my parents didn't raise this. It's like, you have to let that go, and you have to go, this is about them and their future. I'm putting that in the past behind me so that I can set them up for not repeating,
Yeah.
Right.
And for parents, I mean, if anything's difficult for you as a parent, that should be a mirror. Like, what do you need to work on? What do you need to work through? Because
it is a good opportunity for us.
I mean, kids are a mirror, and they really are, I believe, like a massive catalyst of an adult's spiritual journey, if they allow the lessons to actually hit them. And so many parents ignore the lessons because I'm the parent, they're the kid. I don't like this. I'm going to stay in my ways. You know what I mean? I'm not going to let this uncomfortable conversation change me, so that then I can, whatever it might be, generational sin or trauma or whatever it is, needs to get, healed. But
and that you touch on this, and I do want to say something, because I don't want to ever act like it's not about you and your past, it's about them and their future, is dismissive of past. Because I do think when you're talking about this subject, and you're asking parents to move forward and speak whatever, I am not acting like I think the reality is, when parents hear this topic, a lot of baggage comes forward, and a lot of maybe some undealt with baggage, or abuse, or memories, or whatever. And so I would encourage you to really do your own work on that. Don't dismiss it, don't shove it down. Talk to somebody and get help and figure out how to kind of work through that. And at the on the opposite side, move towards with your kids and figure out, what do I want them to know? What do I wish I would have known? What do I wish someone would have told me? And so I don't want to ignore this side of hurt, or because the reality is we live in a broken world, and this is, I think, a topic that Satan really has a stronghold on. And so I don't want to ignore that, but I think the hope is bigger than all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So good. Well, thank you so much, Megan. And we missed Mary Flo, but please share with our listeners just about your course really quick, and where people can find all the books, the course, your Instagram, you guys, just all the information if they want to keep diving deeper into this stuff.
Yeah, if you can't get enough of
that's right.
talking to your kids about sex, you can follow us on Instagram. We're at birds__bees. And then our online course is our most comprehensive resource. It takes about 75 minutes to go from preschool to preteen. It's me and Mary Flo teaching you the 10 steps that kind of walks you through all this. And it has been watched by parents all over the world. And I promise you, you will finish that course feeling like, I can do this. And that's our goal, is for parents to feel equipped and empowered and maybe even excited to talk to their kids about this. So our course is online at birds-bees.com, and I would love to send you guys a discount code to share with your community. And once you buy the course, you have it like lifetime access, because so often parents will watch it when their oldest is like 7, and then, you know, those other ones kind of start to get older, like, oh shoot, I'm on a refresh. Or if you watch it again through the lens of a 9-year-old, you hear something different than you didn't hear the first time. So you have access forever. And we're always around on Instagram or email if you want to find us, ask questions. And I really have appreciated our online community of just parents sharing their stories. You mentioned this earlier I think it's a very empathetic place of people saying, oh, this happened to me, or this would happen with my son, or I wish I would have done this. And we're really kind of all just learning from each other. So
yeah, it is. It's so helpful. Yes, it is. Definitely. Awesome. You guys should follow. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was such an honor. We really appreciate it.
This was, y'all, I'm big fans of you guys, and this is a real treat. So thank you. You're doing great job parenting. Keep it up.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. All right. Talk later. Bye.
Bye.